For 247 days, Declan reviewed the official report until the words blurred into a meaningless prayer. His sister, Alara, an expert skier, had been lost to an avalanche. But as a wildlife biologist, Declan knew the mountain's patterns, and the official story never settled right. While the search teams had packed up months ago, his own cameras kept watch. A silent, digital vigil. It's on a routine check of a Golden Eagle Nest camera that he sees it. A flash of familiar pink against the woven branches, a chilling discovery that proves the mountain hadn't claimed his sister, something, or someone else had. It's a discovery that changes everything, and it makes you wonder what you would do if your instincts told you the official story was a lie. Let us know your thoughts after you've heard this incredible story. The small cabin was suffocating with silence. Outside, the early autumn winds of the Colorado Rockies whispered through the pines, a sound that used to bring Declan peace. Now, it just sounded lonely. The walls were covered in topographical maps, each one marked with grids, search patterns, and handwritten notes that had faded over the last 8 months. On his laptop, a spreadsheet of snowpack data from last winter was still open, a monument to his obsession. He'd cross-reference every official measurement with historical patterns, trying to find the one variable, the one logical reason for the avalanche that had supposedly taken his sister. He never found it. The official report was simple, clean, and tragic. On January 15th, Alara, an experienced backcountry skier, was skiing a solo route on Mount Hayden. A sudden localized slab avalanche was triggered, and she was buried. The search lasted for a week before worsening weather and the high probability of further slides forced them to call it off. Her body was never recovered. Case closed. A tragedy, everyone said. The mountain is unforgiving. Declan had nodded along at the meetings, his face a mask of grief. But inside, a cold, hard knot of doubt had formed. He knew that mountain better than anyone on the search team. It was his office, his sanctuary. He knew the snowpack on that ridge was stable that morning. He checked it himself before heading to his own research area on the opposite slope. It didn't make sense. His grief had since sharpened into a quiet, relentless mission. He'd used his own savings to purchase and deploy a dozen high-end wildlife cameras, placing them in remote spots the search teams had only glanced at. He told himself it was for his ongoing study of alpine predators, but he knew the truth. He was still looking for Alara. Each night he'd download the memory cards, his heart a steady, painful drum against his ribs. The routine was always the same. Hours of wind-shaken branches, the occasional curious deer, a fleeting shadow of a mountain lion. Hope had worn thin, leaving behind only the dull ache of duty. Tonight was no different. He clicked through the files from Camera 7, positioned high on a sheer rock face known as the Widow's Peak, a spot he'd set up to monitor a golden eagle pair. The footage was mostly static shots of the massive nest, a chaotic masterpiece of sticks and branches woven into the cliffside. He fast-forwarded through the uneventful daylight hours, his finger hovering over the delete button. Then he stopped. He blinked, leaning closer to the screen. He rewound the footage, playing it back at normal speed. There, tucked deep within the nest, was something that didn't belong. It was a flash of color, a vibrant, shocking pink against the muted browns and grays of the branches. His breath caught in his throat. He zoomed in, the image pixelating slightly, but there was no mistaking it. It was the color of Alara's favorite ski jacket, the one she'd proudly called her "Look at Me Pink" shell, the one she was wearing in the last photo she'd sent him from the ski lift that morning. Declan felt the blood drain from his face. The eagles were known scavengers, but they wouldn't fly off with an entire jacket. And even if they did, why was it so neatly settled in the nest, not shredded or torn apart? It looked almost placed. A cold dread, colder than any winter wind, washed over him. He had his clue. It wasn't the one he'd hoped for, but it was something. It was proof that the simple story of a skier and an avalanche was wrong. He had to get to that nest. The next morning, the air was crisp and clear. Declan drove his old truck down the winding mountain road to the ranger station. The image of the pink jacket burned into his mind. The station was a small, rustic log building that smelled of pine cleaner and wood smoke. Gene, the head park ranger, was at his desk, nursing a cup of coffee. He was a man in his late 50s with a weathered face and eyes that had seen more than a few tragedies on this mountain. "Declan," he said, his voice laced with weary sympathy, "what can I do for you?" He already knew why Declan was there. He'd seen him around all summer, a ghost haunting the trails where his sister had disappeared. Declan didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pulled out his tablet and showed Jean the image from the camera. "I found something, up on Widow's Peak, in the eagle's nest." Jean squinted at the screen, then looked up at Declan, his expression softening. "Son, an eagle probably just picked up a scrap of fabric from the slide zone. They'll take anything bright and colorful. It doesn't mean anything." "It's not a scrap, Jean, it's the whole jacket. And her goggles are there too. Look," Declan said, pointing to a reflective glint next to the pink fabric. "I need to get up there. I need to see it for myself." Jean sighed, running a hand over his face. Widow's Peak is a technical climb, and rappelling down to that nest, it's incredibly dangerous. I can't officially sanction it. It's out of the original search area, and there's no active investigation. "Then I'll go myself," Declan stated flatly. There was a long silence. Jean studied Declan's face, seeing not the recklessness of a grieving brother, but the focused determination of an expert who knew his environment. He saw the same look he saw in the mirror some mornings. "You know I can't let you do that," Jean said finally, "but I also can't stop a licensed biologist from observing a raptor nest for research purposes, so long as he's accompanied by a ranger for safety. I'll go with you, but Declan, you need to prepare yourself. The chances are this is a false lead. It could be someone else's gear. Don't let hope get the better of you." "Hope left a long time ago, Jean," Declan replied, his voice quiet. "This is about finding the truth." The climb to the top of Widow's Peak took 3 hours. It was a grueling ascent over loose rock and steep inclines. Jean, despite his age, moved with the steady confidence of a man who had spent his life on these slopes. When they reached the summit, the wind was relentless, whipping at their jackets. The nest was about 60 feet below them, on a small ledge on the sheer cliff face. Jean expertly set up the anchors for the rappel line. "You're sure about this?" he shouted over the wind. Declan just nodded, his eyes fixed on the target below. He clipped into the rope, his movements practiced and sure from years of doing similar work for his research. As he began his descent, the world narrowed to the rope in his hands and the rough granite of the cliff face. The nest grew larger as he approached. It was a huge structure, at least 6 feet across. He landed softly on the narrow ledge beside it. The 2 eagles were nowhere in sight, likely out hunting. And there, nestled among the sticks, was the jacket. It was Alara's, there was no doubt. It was faded from the sun and weather, but it was hers. Her goggles were beside it, one lens cracked. With trembling hands, he reached into the nest and carefully lifted the jacket. It was stiff from exposure. He ran his hands over it, checking the pockets. Most were empty. But in the inner chest pocket, the zipper was still closed. He tugged it open. Inside, wrapped in a small, clear plastic baggie, was her GPS tracker. It was a small, durable unit she always carried for safety. The screen was cracked and dark, dead. But the device itself was mostly intact. Declan's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was a real lead. He carefully placed it in his own pack and signaled to Jean that he was ready to ascend. Back in his cabin that night, the world outside disappeared. Declan worked for hours, hunched over his workbench with a magnifying glass and delicate tools. He carefully disassembled the damaged S unit, his biologist's steady hands proving useful for the intricate work. The main power source was fried, but the internal memory chip looked salvageable. He managed to extract it and, using a special adapter, connect it to his computer. He held his breath as he ran the data recovery software. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Then, a single file appeared on the screen. He clicked it open. It was a corrupted map file, but a few data points were readable. He expected them to show Alara's path up the mountain, with the final point somewhere near the avalanche zone or below Widow's Peak. But that's not what he saw. The last recorded coordinate, time-stamped just an hour before the avalanche was reported, was nowhere near her intended route. It was 5 miles away on the far side of the mountain in a remote valley that was rarely visited. Declan pulled up his own detailed map of the area. He knew that valley. There was only one thing there, an old meteorological research station run by the state university. And according to the official Park Service logs, that station was supposed to have been shut down and completely empty for the winter. He stared at the blinking cursor on the screen, a chilling realization dawning on him. The avalanche hadn't been an accident. It was a cover-up. And his sister hadn't been a victim of the mountain. She had been a witness to whatever was happening at that abandoned station. He grabbed his phone and called Jean. "I know where she was," he said, his voice low and tight with a new, cold fury. "And it's not anywhere she should have been." Jean met him at the trailhead the next morning before dawn. The skepticism was gone from his eyes, replaced by a grim resolve. He held 2 pairs of snowshoes and a backpack filled with emergency gear. "I checked the logs last night," Jean said, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The Hayden Valley Station was officially closed for the season on October 1st. Power grid is off. All personnel evacuated. Nobody has authorization to be there until May. "But her GPS puts her right at the station's front door," Declan insisted, showing Jean the coordinates on his tablet. "I know," Jean said, his jaw tight. "That's why I'm here. This isn't an official Park Service operation. This is just 2 concerned citizens going for a long walk. We find anything, we call it in from a distance. We don't engage. Understood?" Declan nodded. The journey to the station was long and arduous. They moved through dense, snow-laden forests and across frozen meadows, the silence broken only by the crunch of their snowshoes. This side of the mountain was wilder, the trails unmaintained. It was the kind of place Alara would have loved to explore, always pushing her own boundaries. After nearly 4 hours, they crested a final ridge, and the valley opened up below them. There it was, the research station. It was a collection of low-slung, modular buildings in a single, tall, meteorological tower, all blanketed in a thick layer of untouched snow. It looked exactly as it should, dormant, abandoned, asleep for the winter. But as they drew closer, Declan spotted the first inconsistency. A thin, almost invisible trail of smoke was rising from the chimney of the main living quarters. "Someone's here," Declan whispered, pointing. Jean nodded, his hand instinctively resting on the radio clipped to his shoulder. They moved off the main path, using the tree line for cover as they circled the compound. They found more signs. A set of fresh tracks, partially covered by new snowfall, leading from a back door to a large storage shed. And then they saw it, a solar panel array set up on the roof of the shed, wires running down to the main building. Someone had set up their own power source completely off the grid. They found a vantage point behind a rocky outcrop that gave them a clear view of the station's main door. They settled in to wait. An hour passed, then another. Just as the cold was beginning to seep deep into their bones, the door of the main building opened. A man stepped out. He was tall and thin, probably in his late 40s, with a haggard look and a thick, unkempt beard. He wore a heavy parka and carried a bucket, which he used to scoop up fresh snow before disappearing back inside. "I don't recognize him," Jean murmured. "He's not on the university roster I pulled up." Declan felt a surge of adrenaline. This had to be the person Alara encountered. He pulled out his binoculars, focusing on the windows of the building. Through one of the windows in the living quarters, he could see the man moving around inside, and on a small table next to a worn armchair, he saw something that made his blood run cold. It was a water bottle, bright blue, with a distinctive dent on the side. It was Alara's. He'd given it to her for her last birthday. "That's him," Declan said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's in there, and he has her water bottle." All thoughts of waiting and calling for backup vanished, replaced by an overwhelming need for answers. He looked at Jean. "I'm going in." "Declan, no. We call this in. That's the plan," Jean hissed, grabbing his arm. "The plan just changed," Declan shot back, shrugging off Jean's hand. "That man has my sister's things. He knows what happened. I'm not leaving this mountain without an answer." Before Jean could stop him, Declan broke cover, moving swiftly and silently across the snow-covered ground toward the front door of the research station. He was no longer just a biologist. He was a brother on the hunt for a killer. The heavy wooden door was unlocked. Declan pushed it open slowly, stepping into a small, cluttered entryway. The air inside was warm and smelled of coffee and stale smoke. He could hear the low hum of electronics coming from a room down the hall. He moved forward, his boots silent on the floorboards. He entered the main living space, a combined kitchen and lounge area. The man was there, his back to the door, tending to a small wood stove. Alara's water bottle was on the table, just as Declan had seen. The man must have heard something, a shift in the air, because he stiffened and slowly turned around. His eyes widened in shock and fear when he saw Declan standing there. "Who are you?" the man demanded, grabbing a fireplace poker. "How did you find this place?" "My name is Declan," he said, his voice steady despite the rage boiling inside him. "And you have something that belonged to my sister." He gestured with his head toward the water bottle. The man's face paled. He glanced from the bottle to Declan, recognition and panic dawning in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I found that on the trail." "What trail?" Declan pressed, taking a step forward. "There are no trails for miles. The only person to come through here in the last year was my sister, Alara." "What happened to her?" Just then, Gene burst through the door, his radio in hand. "It's over," he said to the man. "We've already called it in. State police are on their way." The man, trapped and outnumbered, seemed to collapse in on himself. The fireplace poker clattered to the floor. He sank into the armchair, his face in his hands. His name was Dr. Eris Thorne. He wasn't a university employee. He was a disgraced atmospheric physicist who had been fired for conducting unauthorized, dangerous experiments. He had secretly come to the abandoned station to continue his work in private, using illegal sonic emitters to try and manipulate weather patterns. "She wasn't supposed to be here," Eris mumbled, his voice cracking. "This area is off limits. She came out of the trees right over that ridge. She saw the emitters, the whole setup. She was smart, started asking questions I couldn't answer." Declan felt a wave of nausea. "What did you do?" "I panicked," Eris confessed, tears now streaming down his face. "She had her phone out. I thought she was calling the authorities. I just wanted to scare her, to destroy the equipment so there'd be no proof. I aimed one of the emitters at a snow cornice above her. I was just trying to cause a small slide, something to make her run, to bury the gear." His voice trailed off. "But it wasn't a small slide, was it?" Declan said, his voice hollow. Eris shook his head, sobbing. "It was massive." The whole face of the mountain gave way. She was gone, just gone in seconds. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear I didn't." He told them everything, how he'd watched in horror as the avalanche roared down the mountain, how he'd hidden in the station for days, terrified. He even admitted to seeing one of the golden eagles from Widow's Peak circling the debris field a few days later. He watched through binoculars as it tore at a piece of pink fabric and flew off with it, carrying the evidence to its nest high on the cliff face. He was too afraid to try and retrieve it. Gene relayed the confession over the radio. The truth was finally out. It was a story of arrogance and cowardice, a stupid, pointless tragedy born from one man's selfish ambition. 2 weeks later, guided by the information from Eris, a recovery team was sent into the avalanche zone. Declan went with them. The spring thaw had melted much of the snow, and it didn't take them long to find her. She was buried deep, but she was at peace. They held a small memorial service at the base of the mountain. It was a clear, sunny day, the kind Alara had loved most. As her friends and family shared stories, Declan looked up at the sky. High above, a golden eagle circled lazily on the thermal currents, a silent watcher over the valley. He no longer felt anger, only a profound sadness and a quiet sense of closure. He had lost his sister, but he had found the truth. And in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, that was a victory he would carry with him for the rest of his life. What would you do if you were in Declan's shoes? Would you have trusted the official report, or would your own instincts have pushed you to keep searching for the truth, no matter the cost? It's a difficult question, and everyone's answer is different. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who appreciates a tale of mystery and perseverance. Every share helps us bring these incredible stories to more people. Thank you for listening.